Welcome to Sri Lanka. Thank you so much. I think it's a really pleasure to having you here. Mr. Talati, we know that you are a president of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. Why don't you introduce yourself to the Sri Lankan community about India and yourself?
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be with all of your audience from Sri Lanka. And we work very closely with the CA Sri Lanka and SAFA. I'm Aniket Talati, the president of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. It's a statutory body under an Act of Parliament created in 1949, which is responsible for the overall regulation as well as development of the chartered accountancy profession in India. And this year in 2023, on 1st of July, we enter our 75th year of ICAI. We're glad to have almost 370,000 members and close to 800,000 students pursuing the course of chartered accountancy. And ICAI is one of the largest accounting bodies in the world.
Okay, it's interesting. The questions that we are curated is predominantly on the sustainability side. We know that India very passionately working on the sustainability standard and so on and so forth. Shall I start from asking what is your own definition of sustainability? How do you perceive sustainability?
So for me, sustainability is the ability to sustain without compromising on the future.
Sure.
So a lot of times when one in his daily life is doing various courses, it may be driving to your office, it may be doing your daily things in your home or office, or how you live, how you function as a corporate. It's about how you are able to do the same things without compromising on the future. And therefore you sustain and have the ability to sustain and live in a manner that you leave at least the same, if not a better world for your next generation.
Yes, yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, that's the true spirit of the sustainability. If you move it to the India sustainability standard, how they are progressing, what is the current role that the India playing in terms of sustainability standards?
So currently what we are proud to have is the Sustainability Reporting Standards Board in India. The SRSB, as we call it, was established in 2020 and it has already been functioning for 3 years. This is going to be the 4th year of the Sustainability Reporting Standards Board. And I think it is one of the first pioneering reporting standards board on sustainability that any PAO would have established. And what we've been able to do in 3 years is come out with GHG standards, which is GHG emission standards. We also have ESG standards, which we are setting up. What we've also been able to do with the Sustainability Reporting Standards Board is to have a huge amount of training to our membership about the concept of sustainability and ESG. 15 batches have been done on this very area of sustainability. We tried to be the trendsetter by having the World Congress of Accountants, which was held in India last year, attended by more than 8,000 participants in person, maybe 3,000 virtually, and the entire event was a carbon neutral event, and that was our commitment to ensure that the entire World Congress, once it is over, we are not able to only state that the theme was sustainability, but have the entire event in a sustainable manner. So yes, a lot of things happening at the Sustainability Reporting Standards Board, standards coming out, training of members, and with the WCOA, what we've also been able to do now is at the UNCTAD, that is the United Nations, the chairmanship of the sustainability is with the chairman of the Sustainability Reporting Standards Board.
Yeah, very interesting. I think the point that I really liked is that even that event, you make it like a neutral or rather zero carbon footprint, which is very interesting. I mean, the things that are happening in the world, we'll have the sustainability committees and the meeting and so on and so forth, but you will burning fossil fuel, and it's a kind of a burning issue for even for the country as well as the whole world. I'm moving a little away from the Chartered Institute. I like to know the corporates in India. I mean, when you want to move it to the sustainability standard, what is the platform that you are using, whether you mandate it or is it a voluntary disclosure that you are asking from the, especially when you can link it with this ESG performance of this corporate. I mean, how you couple these things, and there's a ESG mandate is there, how they perform against the ESG, and then the listed companies in India, then the sustainability standard is there, then when you make it a mandate or whether it's a voluntary, I mean, how that whole things link it to each other?
So currently the regulatory framework in India, and again, look, sustainability is not just regulation, it's also something that is cultural. So what we all have as accountants have to also try and understand is we have a huge role to play in spreading the awareness of sustainability. So not just at the sustainability level for corporates, at the institute we realized that sustainability should start at a young age. So we did quiz competitions for school children to teach them the culture of sustainability. On the corporate front, the question that you asked me, how does India mandate sustainability? We have the Securities and Exchange Board of India, which is the regulator for the markets. So SEBI has, for 2023, our financial year, mandated that top 1,000 listed companies will have to come out with what is known as the BRSR, Business Responsibility and Sustainability Reporting. So it was made mandatory for the top 1,000 companies to have sustainability reporting. So in terms of the regulatory framework that we are in, currently it's for the top listed companies, and going forward, the market regulator will of course try and see how it can be percolated down to all the listed entities going forward. And of course, I see in the future it's going to play a huge role for the unlisted entities also.
Sure. I think I really like your point where the education starting from very young age. I think the key thing is about when it comes to sustainability, it has to be part and parcel of your DNA. I mean, then you won't be able to, because it can't implant over time. It has to be start from the young age. Then when they grow up, it is a way of life. It is the way that people can live. I mean, that's something that we are deviating because of this technology and so on and so forth. But technology may be a kind of a enabler for the sustainability in terms of this thing. How India using especially the technological front. I mean, what kind of a, because if you look at the issue here is all these new technologies pretty much costly for people to adapt. I mean, even the sustainability technologies that they are in the market, it is very expensive. I think India as a frontier in terms of the technological front, how the technology will be a part and parcel of this sustainability.
So I think a very good question that you ask, and I think sustainability resonates more for me when I visit a country like Sri Lanka. I was recently in Maldives also, where you talk of the blue economy. And not just because it's an island state, or even Sri Lanka, for example, is surrounded by water, and with the impacts of global warming. I think the biggest impact is going to be in countries like Sri Lanka, where with levels of water rising, the temperatures changing, your flora, fauna, everything gets disturbed, and that has a huge impact not just on industries and business, but also on human life. So I think, yes, very important to underline that it's not just business which is important, it is the day-to-day life also which gets impacted. And on technology, I think in fact it has been a huge enabler. So a basic technology, yesterday if I had to do a meeting before COVID, it was impossible for one to imagine that you could do it virtually. You know, it was always one had to fly, take a car to the venue, do the meeting for an hour, again take the car back, fly back home. So much carbon emission. And today if you have a 30-minute meeting, you can just do a digital meeting through any of the platforms. And therefore technology in fact is a huge enabler. If you ask me is about the costs of certain technologies, yes, some technologies to start off will be expensive. But today if you look at solar power, for example, it was always considered to be very expensive. But today solar power is getting traded at 2.25, ₹2.50 in India, which is as good as how the thermal power generation costs. So as sustainability gets adopted wider, I think that the cost of technology of implementing these measures is also going to bring down the cost. And like I said at the beginning, it's about what we're doing for the future. So if it is slightly more expensive today, I think it is worth it just because of what we leave for our next generation.
Yes, yeah. Again, the point that you touch upon, if there's a more adapters or rather there'll be more companies adapting that technology, the scale point of view, there'll be a cost benefit. That's a real, like, it's the point that that everybody make sure that okay, whatever form and shape, I mean there are smaller way that these things have to be inculcate within their companies. Yes. I like to bring up another point where SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. what is its current status in India, or maybe you can take it all the South Asia as a whole, because there's a linkage between sustainability and SDGs.
Most definitely. Even if you look at
so
what I'm wearing on my blazer, these are the SDG goals which the United Nations has set forth, and 2030 is the deadline. In India, we have the Niti Aayog, which was in the old shape and form known as the Planning Commission. And Niti Aayog has a very strong mechanism to monitor the implementation of SDGs. In fact, they do a score ranking. You can go online and measure the portal. And I believe today the score is 66, where India is. And the trajectory that they are projecting, I think India is definitely well on its way to implement all these sustainable development goals by 2030. And yes, the ESG framework definitely falls within these SDGs, because these are very important goals that the United Nations and all the international community has set forth for itself. And at the India level, these get tracked. In the South Asia also, a lot of the countries are tracking these, because it's a commitment that all of us have made, and it's going to be very important for us to ensure that by 2030, majority of nations adopt it. And I'm pretty confident majority parts of South Asia, if we all put our minds together, and even the accounting community helps in measuring this, because these are qualitative goals. But in my understanding, anything which is qualitative, somewhere there will always be a quantitative matrix through which you can measure it. And if we are able to help as accountants in measuring it, I think the achievement of those SDG goals by 2030 will definitely become possible.
Interesting. Actually, you brought up the point is in my questions, that about how that qualitative and the quantitative. I think I can't help it asking this question. What is the role of accountants? I mean, how they actually be the enabler for this whole thing. We know that there are so many professions but this is something that very close to us, isn't it? I mean, this for the accountants, especially to be the role setter or other trend setters, say that, okay, look here, these are ways in which we can do it. I mean, how you feel about this?
You're absolutely right. So whenever there is numbers, I think we always automatically come in as accountants. And especially for sustainability, if you look at the Global Accounting Forum, which is IFAC, which is the voice of the accounting profession. If you look at what the IFAC commits to, it says we want to commit the accounting profession towards sustainability. So the message is loud and clear that this is where all of us will have to go. Now, in terms of your specific question of how accountants can ensure sustainability in industries and businesses and corporations. Look, if you think that it's just going to be on the ERP, just putting in a button and plugging and capturing all the details, I don't think that is how it will function. There are scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions which have to be mapped. What it will definitely entail is cross-functionality between a lot of the accountants and some experts. So it is not a domain exclusively for accountants, but I feel it cannot be completed without the accounting community being there. So you will need the operational guys to tell you about how you can cut down on, for example, pollution, emissions. It may be water, it may be air pollution, or it may be other forms of utilities that you're using, the vendors that you're dealing with, and other aspects. But eventually, you will always need an accountant to ensure that it gets measured correctly, because the sustainability effort will also have to get reported. Look, if ESG was only to be good English and on a report, I think it will not achieve its purpose. There has to be some measurability also. And more than measurability, I feel there is going to be a reporting to the board and eventually an assurance function which will come in to measure whether you are actually achieving these ESGs. And for that, the accounting community definitely has a huge role to play.
Yeah. Sort of ask a few direct questions. Is sustainability being sustainable? Is it very difficult being sustainable? I mean, for a corporate, or if I put it the other way around, do companies need to be rich in sustainability, or can it be, if you are not rich, can't you be in sustainability?
No, look, I think it's the other way. If you want to ever be rich, if you want to be on the right side of doing things, you will always have to be sustainable. It's no longer a choice. If you look at the global investment market, if you look at the front flows, and going forward, not just equity but debt markets, people just don't want to invest money and get the highest IRR or the return. There's also very clear understanding in the investment community that where the dollar is going or where the rupee is getting invested, they want to make sure that the company that is engaged and in which the investment is happening is doing right by its people, is doing right by the environment. There was a time when everything used to be measured by single P, that is profit. But today, and ever so increasingly by the day, the 3 Ps are going to be important. Besides profit, it's going to be people and planet. And companies which don't do right by its people, by its customers, vendors, by the entire ecosystem in which they are working, they don't do right by the governments that they are functioning and the country in which they are working, if they are not doing the right things in terms of dealing with its employees, I don't think you're going to have too many takers. So this concept of sustainability being restricted to the rich, I think it is perceived so because currently the reporting requirement is only limited to a select set of companies which have a certain higher market capitalization. But mind you, that is only for the reporting purposes. Going forward, with access to funds, debt markets, equity, all of this factors in ESG and sustainability. It's not something which is exclusively for the rich. I would say it's better that each company starts adopting sustainability at the earliest, because it's difficult for a huge animal to move. But if you're smaller in size, you can easily navigate. Similarly, for the larger corporates, the huge change in culture which they may have to do. But for smaller entities, I believe it's so much easier. And when they can see that the future is going to be here, I would say it's not something for the rich, but something that all must adopt.
I think you brought this discussion for a very interesting point, that the reporting is applicable for the first tier of capital market or the corporate companies. Then there's a kind of a questions that people ask, whether there's something called greenwashing happening in terms of all this reporting. I know that this it may be not applicable for the smaller community or SMEs and all, but for the bigger corporates, what's Indian perception on this greenwashing, especially the institute level at your institute?
So look, does greenwashing happen in the world? Of course it does. We are joking ourselves if we don't accept the fact. That is where I go back to the question that you asked me, where is the role of the accountants? And I think as accountants, as auditors, we provide assurance. And what is going to also be needed in the future is certain level of assurance on this reporting, because it is not just the disclosures of what you make that should constitute sustainability. It should be measurable, and it should also be auditable in terms of providing a reasonable assurance that the entity has been able to do it. So yes, greenwashing may be a reality. Anything that you do, any new way which you bring in, will always have certain challenges, pitfalls, and something may fall through the cracks. But I feel that should not stop us in any way in achieving what the long-term objective is.
I think I like your point where we shouldn't actually, as accountant, we shouldn't actually make a leeway for these things to happen. I like your thought. I mean, I know that India started this whole journey well before every one of us. Then is there any message that you like to give it to accountants as well as the auditors? I mean, when they are looking at this sphere, I mean, what kind of things to be noted, or what are the things that they have to be mindful when they are doing the statutory audit and so on and so forth?
So I go back to the theme of the World Congress which we had in India very recently, a few months ago. And we said, building trust, enabling sustainability. And I think these are two cornerstones in the future for auditors. Trust is extremely important. Trust by the users of the financial statement, by government, by your regulators, by the financial markets, by all stakeholders. And sustainability going forward is also going to be so much more important in their auditors reporting and giving their assurance standards. My only message to them would be that over the years we've learned to live with changes. Accounting used to happen on paper. When technology came, we collaborated with our friends in the technology domain. Some of our accountants became system auditors and started providing assurance on the technology aspect of it. And I think it is just a gradual progression of the accounting profession, moving from pen and paper, going digital, and now having digital, but also incorporating the sustainability. And here again, like we worked with the technology experts, I think it's going to be the time for us to work with sustainability experts, GHG experts, people who understand more of the scientists or the scientific community rather, who are able to give us a better guidance in terms of how do you measure it, and then eventually give assurance on it.
I think I like the point where there's an evolution role for the accountants, from pen and paper to the technology and so on and so forth. I like to turn our discussion to a different point where I think it's even one person, or rather it could be a government or it could be a private, that particular person by alone can't play the sustainability role. I think there's a movement happening in the world that you are making where private-public partnerships, that there are so many ways and we should look at it. Then in that context, I'm asking a question, how we can move this bigger elephant we may call the sustainability, because it's a big project we are talking about, public-private partnerships. And how we're going to do that? A. B, whether there's any other ways in which we can actually make in this sustainability. I'm asking the public-private partnership may be one method of doing it, whether there's anything that India would look at it in this context.
So what I would say is it's going to be a two-way approach. It's going to be corporates changing because they understand this is the right thing to do. Boards will have a very important role, because in the board meetings, in the audit committee meetings, these are questions which board members will ask of what one is doing in ESG, because that is what is being discussed across boardrooms in the world. So there is going to be a push on sustainability towards the ESG reporting from companies, corporates, because of the corporate governance and the board framework. But there's also, remember, going to be a very important compulsion for a lot of them to have these standards in place, measurements in place, reporting in place, because the access of funds eventually is also going to be determined on how compliant you are. Today nobody wants to invest in a polluting company. It may be able to generate a higher profit, but it gets frowned upon, and it's not something where you will be able to raise equity and capital very easily. Therefore today, if you look at energy, if you're telling somebody that there's a thermal power plant, yes, of course you will raise capital, but the cost of capital, and if you compare that with any of the newer technologies, it may be solar, wind, hydrogen, wherever one is trying to invest, there is that much more easier for you to raise finance, because financial institutions, equity investors, banks, all are now looking at this as a very important aspect when they in turn want to finance projects. So yes, public-private partnership, extremely important. The government by itself cannot do it. The private sector itself will not do it, and therefore it is going to require a joint partnership of both to take it forward.
Yeah. I think you touch upon a very nice point where it's a sort of a mandate in the boards. Then I'd like to move it to a kind of a different thing. We discuss about DE&I, diversity, inclusion, how that particular piece playing in the board roles to enable the sustainability. Do you think any movement in India, for example, composition of the boards, whether the diversity and inclusion is taken care of? Because I think at the beginning you set a very clear point. Okay, look here, we are starting from the younger generation. I mean, we said that, okay, look, it has to be part and parcel of your DNA. Then we know that there are boards, maybe they are a little old, we will put it that way. But how this particular dynamics works in India especially?
No, so look, I think 2-3 points. First and foremost, with regards to the sustainability aspect of inculcating it through a young age, I think culturally, for most of our countries, for example, I'll give you a small example which is for every household. If your t-shirt or shirt became old, a lot of people used to use it to mop the floor. Now this is classic sustainability. It may not have been defined as such, but it is using the same product in a different manner so that you're using it for a longer term, and therefore you're able to not require to buy a mop, but you're using the old item again. Very small example, but these are all cultural changes which will come in, and it's always been there. What I feel is in South Asian countries especially, this is very cultural in terms of how we've been sustainable. We've been taught and brought up in this. It's only realizing that it's now going to be important for companies and everybody else also to be sustainable, because we are not the highest polluters in the world, any of the South Asian countries. We may have a high density of population, we may have a huge population in our countries as compared to the absolute numbers worldwide, but nowhere do we compare in per capita emissions as compared to the Western world. So So I think this is not a concept which is Western or foreign to us. It's something which is ingrained in our culture. It's only aligning that culture with the new corporate practices, and therefore I feel it's going to be in fact easier for companies in this region to adopt to these changes because it comes naturally to us.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'd like to move it to another point again on the board and all this thing, especially what's the role of the governance, because we know that ESG also there's a governance. Then the governance, how that governance dynamics in terms of the sustainability, we know that there is a whole lot of things happening in the corporate, corporate governance, there's a code and so on and so forth. Then whether there's anything that we could do, or maybe it's happening through the governance about the sustainability.
So look, in my view, there is no E and S without G.
That's correct.
Because if you talk about environment, you talk about sustainability, but there's no governance on top of it. It will only be just plain disclosures and good English. It may not mean what it should. And therefore governance is very important. You need people on boards to ask the right questions and not just take what the management has prepared as the gospel truth and accept it. You will have to also try and at governance level try and see for any corporates that are functioning and the boards which are independent especially and have a huge independent directorship, those people will have to ask the right questions and see whether all departments are actually aligned to these environment and societal objectives which have been laid out. You also ask about inclusion, for example, in the last question, and how that gets taken care of. In India, we already have the requirement that in a listed entity, you need a woman director. So that has already been mandated to have broader based participation, have a more inclusive board. And once you have things like that, you have professional directors, independent directors, women, all of these, I think, fit into that governance framework very well. And once you have the right framework of governance, I think E and S can be taken care of. Okay. But yes, I repeat myself, there cannot be an E or an S without the G, that is governance.
Exactly. I think that is that's sort of an umbrella sort of a structure. I think I really liked your point. I think we almost come to the end of this thing, but I can't help asking this question. I can't help, or maybe I can't. We recently started, I think Sri Lankan Institute, we recently start this sustainability, the standard committee here. I mean, I'm sure that people are listening from that front as well. What are the messages, because you said that you already started maybe like 3 years before you already started, maybe come to maybe like a maturity point, I mean how these things are happening. Then we know that there's a standard is yet to, or rather 2 standard is yet to come from global front. What are the message that you like for us to give, or are the learning points that you like to give it to us?
So I think internationally we would all want that we all align to the international standards. That is how it happened for the IFRS, for example, the financial reporting standards, the auditing standards, the ethical standards. My personal opinion though would be that in the beginning, whenever something new comes in, there is a lot of mismatch. You will not align. Each country will have a specific requirement. And I appreciate what the ISSB is trying to do with these 2 exposure drafts. But in India, the SRSB and the larger feeling of the market regulators and others has been that it should not simply be the financial aspect of it, but the non-financial also has a very important role on sustainability. I think going forward, yes, we may have certain divergences when we go forward. In Sri Lanka, when you have your own board and you will have your discussions, you may have your priorities. And ISSB will of course try and standardize, because remember they are going to come out with what is going to be the common minimum requirement on sustainability. And for the few first years when we talk about sustainability, there may be certain divergences, differences or carve-outs as we call them in the financial reporting. But I think it is all in good practice because it's an evolving area. Accounting has been there for ages. We know what is debit, we know what is credit. So measurement was always very similar or clear. The disclosures have changed over the years. And here too in sustainability, I feel I wish all the best, first of all, to the Sri Lanka Institute for embarking on this journey. And I'm sure when you interact with your regulators, with your corporates, with companies, with accountants in business as well as in practice, you will realize that there is going to be certain level of changed expectations. and you'll be able to develop your own standards which will suit the requirement of Sri Lanka. As the institute and the president of ICAI, I can only extend our fullest help and cooperation to CA Sri Lanka in developing this. We have some course material, we have a lot of work which we have done, and some of it, if there is no need to reinvent the wheel, we're very happy to offer all of these to CA Sri Lanka, so that I think the entire South Asian region together can have and set an example in how we function towards sustainability reporting as professional accountants.
Thank you so much, and really happy. And thank you so much, Mr. Talati. I mean, spending time here in Sri Lanka, spending time at this institute, and sharing your valuable thoughts with us.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to be with you, the president, vice president, the entire council of the institute, and my best wishes to all the members and students of CA Sri Lanka, and of course the entire Sri Lankan community. You've gone through challenging times, but I'm sure there is always light at the end of the tunnel, and you have greater days, greener days, bluer days in front of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.